Okay. So Christian, can you share the slides, please?
Yeah.
All right. I gotta get all my windows here. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming from. Thank you for joining us today for this workshop on writing policy papers on civic science. The call for papers that we'll discuss today aims to promote the concept of civic science to broad audiences, provide a platform for emerging leaders in civic science to showcase the policy implications of their work, and elevate policies needed to advance civic science initiatives to serve society. This event is organized by the Journal of Science Policy and Governance as part of a larger partnership with Sigma Xi and the Rita Allen Foundation, who are co-sponsoring this special issue. So thank you for your support. I also want to thank the outreach partners for the issue, who have been tremendous help for disseminating the call for papers and events and helping promote. So thank you to ARIS, UCS, ESAL, and CCST for your partnership. Hopefully, folks here will benefit from this event as well. So let's go to the next slide. Just want to give a little bit of more background on this. So the workshop today is meant to equip students, policy fellows, and early career researchers with skills needed to write effective policy papers on civic science. And this is leading up to our special topics issue with an October deadline. I'll share the link in the chat shortly. And leading up to the deadline, today's event will be followed by 2 webinars with thought leaders discussing different facets of civic science. So I encourage you to register for the events. Again, I'll share the link in a little bit. And we'll provide also more information on the webinars towards the end of these events. So in terms of introduction, so my name is Adriana Bankston. I'm currently the CEO and managing publisher for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. You can follow me at Adriana Bankston on Twitter, JSPG at Untitled Journal, and Sigma Xi at Sigma Xi Society. As you can see, we're recording this event, so we'll be able to share it out as well if you'd like to watch the recording. And during the event, we'd also like to encourage you to follow JSPG, Sigma Xi, Rita Allen, and the partners on social media channels. We're using the hashtag JSPG Civic Science, so you can share about the event today. So I want to give you a little bit of background on the journal before we go into the writing workshop and practice. Next slide, please. So JSPG, we're an internationally recognized open access and peer-reviewed research publication. We're also a nonprofit, have been around for about 10 years or so. And we serve as a vehicle for students and early career scholars to publish articles concerning every corner of science and technology policy. We also provide a platform for them to bolster their research and writing credentials and encourage them to engage and contribute to policymaking at all levels of government. Next. Thank you. We publish a number of different formats, as you can see here, op-eds, memos, shorter write-ups, longer write-ups, white papers, and so on. So really a number of different formats. You can see all the list of topics here. Of course, here we're today discussing the civic science call for papers, but we have calls for submissions throughout the year for standard issues and other special issues coming in the future. So if you're interested in the topic, you may find it in this list. We publish any and all things covering science policy. Next slide. So we have two standard issues and 2 to 4 special topics per year. Our standard issues are open calls for submissions on all formats and all topics. Special topics, as we'll discuss today, are sponsored by partnering organizations and very focused on topic. We always get questions about eligibility, so you can feel free to reach out to us. But we primarily publish papers from students, postdocs, policy fellows, and folks who are early career professionals, really trying to stay true to our mission to highlight early career folks in policy and their publications. Next slide. So we already discussed today's call for papers. So I'm going to just share the link again, so you can sort of look at this while we're going through the introduction. Oops. And then let me send. Okay. So sorry, a second. So in addition to publications, we offer a number of professional development opportunities and public engagement with published work. So hopefully this will incentivize you to submit to the journal. We submitted an RFI a couple of years ago based on publications to an OSTP call on diversity in STEM. So we do try to get the ideas out more in the public and sort of the real world policy, what's happening now. We try to engage with media outlets to promote published work. So here are a couple of examples. One is from Inside Higher Ed. We had a paper on open access. And then we had some students from Northwestern who published on diversifying languages and publications, which is very interesting. And Northwestern actually interviewed them and wrote this highlight about their papers in the journal. So we either get universities to do it, or we try to pitch to different outlets depending on the topic. That could be a helpful addition to your publication too. Next. So as we're doing here today, we have these sorts of writing workshops for all of our call for papers. We also have webinars, as we'll talk about sort of discussions on different topics. And we have training opportunities. So we partnered with UC Irvine's program, one of the programs there, and for a certificate program in science policy and advocacy with a number of other partners as well. We promote authors speaking on panels. And so you can see here one of the panels here. And we have opportunities to engage with the journal outside of publications, also through the editorial board. Applications are currently open, and through the ambassador program, which is open to undergrads and grad students to highlight some published work and help us run the journal. So all these things are ongoing throughout the year. I'll share our newsletter at some point. Please do subscribe and keep in touch with us, and you can engage with us through these opportunities. Okay, and then also just a couple of highlights here. We've had authors presenting at conferences to partners. So here we have a climate issue with the UK Science and Innovation Network. Authors presented to essentially the British Embassy virtually, which is interesting. But this is a good example of an opportunity that we provide through the partners to be able to showcase published work in different speaking venues like this. And then we also have a podcast shown on the right here, where we interview authors for an additional engagement opportunity on publications. Next slide. And then here are all the channels. I'll share these in the chat, but do follow us on social media. We have call for submissions and events all throughout the year. So do please get in touch with us if you have questions as well. So with that, let me switch from this and briefly introduce Christian Ross. So in relation to today's discussion from this introduction, we'll have Christian talk about a bit of the context of the policy questions related to the call for papers, and then we'll go into the breakouts to go through a policy paper outline. So Christian is a postdoctoral research analyst with Tufts University and Rita Allen Foundation. He's also the former editor-in-chief for JSPG, so he has a lot of knowledge here, so please do ask questions. By training, he's a PhD scientist and also policy expert with over 7 years of research experience, specializing in science policy and emerging biotech governance. And he's also interested in evaluating dimensions of civic science and technology, and also advocates for the rightful place of evidence and expertise in democracy. So Christian, thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to chat with you all today. And yeah, like Adriana said, I'm sort of a postdoc, but also working with Rita Allen Foundation, but also used to do the editor-in-chief stuff with JSPG. So I really have a lot of things right at the intersection of this particular special issue and maybe not much else, but it all aligns really nicely for today. So really, I hope to kind of do this quickly so we can get into breakout rooms and you can have more time for back and forth questions and kind of exploring these topics. But so I want to come at you in kind of two parts. Part one is I want to say what is civic science a little bit, or at least prompt that area to give some concrete things with that. And then another part in kind of a crash course in policy writing. What are the pieces that you need? How do you do it? Or how do you get started? So yeah, hopefully there's also time for some questions at the end. If I speed through something or gloss over things, we'll get to that. So let me make sure that this is all set. Yeah, great. So civic science, that sounds cool, but what does that actually mean? And for those of us who are kind of doing civic science work or who have been involved in civic science communities, it's kind of an open secret that civic science is hard to tack down exactly what it means. But in general, and I think in a helpful way, civic science is at this intersection point. It's about taking an approach to how we do science, to how we do democracy and how we build equity, that science is somewhere in this collaborative, co-creative space where these things come together. So one way that I think about civic science and this civic science imperative is that it's important that we think about how we know things, that's maybe the science component, how we decide things, like the democracy component, and then like how we know what's good and what's good for all. So that's gonna be the equity component. And that's a oversimplification, and it's gonna like there's overlaps and things where that can be more precise. And probably places where things can be pushed back on. But that's, when we're talking about civic science, it's this kind of confluence of what are the things that we care about, the values we have around science, democracy, equity outcomes for society. And that can take a lot of different forms. So this is, I did not make this, I have stolen this from the Rita Allen Foundation because they've done great work already, but there's a lot of different ways that civic science can manifest. And some of you might be familiar with science communication, science policy, if you're at this workshop, but maybe some of you are less engaged with yourself, public engagement, community science. There's a lot of areas where civic science issues come up, and probably more than even are right here. I think in general, if you can think that it kind of fits with the idea that we're interested in science issues and also like what's good for the people and the world, and how do we actually do that systematically, civic science is related or encapsulates those things too. And I want to talk a little bit about maybe a little more concrete, some of the values that go with civic science. The Rita Allen Foundation has developed a civic science fellows program. And when we go into the breakout room, some of the moderators are either maybe still current, but like alums of this fellowship program. And it's really a fantastic group that gets placed in these really interesting organizations doing really interesting projects that are related to civic science. But through this community, a set of pillars or values for civic science have been co-created over time. And these are not meant to be exclusive or exhaustive and maybe not totally discrete from one another, but this is to give a sense for what are the things that civic science cares about. And very briefly, it's things like understand that science doesn't happen in a vacuum, that it's embedded in society and has human dimensions to it. That equity is an important consideration when we think about how we build and design the world in the future that we want to have. Being able to communicate clearly, effectively, and inclusively for different groups, making sure that everyone's involved in the processes that go into how science works in the world. Building, so scaffolding for learning and impact, making sure that we have the capacity and infrastructure and support systems and on-ramps that are necessary for people to know what resources exist, access those resources, and have success. And whether that's building for science capacity or engagement capacity or something else, the scaffolding is the support system, the support to hold up those efforts. And then this last bit, leading for systems change, recognizing that it's not just about individual efforts or single people, though single people can make a huge impact, but thinking more in terms of institutions and organizations and systems for how science and democracy and equity goals can be achieved. And that's all kind of like prologue for civic science. But for this particular special issue, there are kind of 4 areas you'll see in the call for papers where there's just more emphasis that we think these are areas that are important and have a lot of rich opportunities for critical engagement and things to think through carefully, and might have significant policy relevance or policy implications. And you can see more details of all the questions. We're going to spend a lot of time in the breakout groups kind of on some of these subjects. So I'm not going to get too deep into it here, but essentially network building, questions about public trust in science and polarization, how we actually make change through policy, and like actually engaging with communities, not just engaging around them or talking at them. And then engaging the people to actually improve like science and society. Like how do we like make these institutions and organizations function better? These again are just the areas that this special issue has emphasized and have kind of targeted as these are some prompting areas. If you have a project in mind that you want to write a paper about that is not in one of these, first of all, it probably fits in under 1. This is pretty broad categories. But 2, if it's outside of it, still like submit something. It's great. We'll figure it out kind of where it belongs. If it's really a really great, pressing issue, then it belongs in this special issue. So that concludes my what is civic science and for the special issue. And this is now the part where I put on my former editor-in-chief hat and say, so how do you do this science policy writing? And also do it really fast because I don't want to take too much time. But there are kind of 2 phases that I think about in the writing. There's before you start writing, and then there's I have to write something down on paper. And I think it's better to start on the before you start writing because you've not already invested the time and energy and all that. And if you've written things like science journal articles before or academic papers, you may have some idea of like what it takes to to write a paper from beginning to end, but maybe not for the specific kind of differences for a policy piece. So these are 3 things that I do, always recommend to do before you actually start writing, and that is like actually identify and have a clear boundary on what issue you're writing about. You can't do everything, especially in a policy piece. Policy pieces should be more targeted to a particular issue and have the appropriate amount of like detail and also targetedness for what you're trying to write about. You also have a very specific audience, unlike maybe a science journal article you might write or be a co-author on, where you're writing to the whole journal's audience. You might have a specific organization or kind of person in mind that you would love to have a chance to actually read what you're writing. So specifying exactly who you're writing to is an important first step before you actually get into the details. And then appropriate scale. If your goal is you want to have a policy recommendation for something about climate change, you have to make sure that your recommendation of more money for this subset of research, is that really going to solve the problem of like all of climate change all at once? Probably not, right? So finding a way to scale whatever it is that you're recommending is a policy thing that's relevant from your project, from your research and your expertise, and how that corresponds to the specific kinds of outcomes that are realistic, that are relevant, that are really impactful in a policy setting. So if you've sat down and you've done these things very, very quickly, again, we're doing this on like speed mode. Like imagine you've already done these things. Now you're sitting down to write. What are the things that a policy paper needs? And I am very categorical in my structuring. And so I identify these are 5 things that every paper needs. That is a policy paper. It doesn't have to be in this order. It doesn't have to be like, there might be other things you include, but I think that every effective science policy piece of writing has to have these 5 pieces. And really, it's just giving background context for what the heck you're talking about and why it matters, identifying what the core problem is and being specific about what is a problem and why it's a problem. Policy significance, meaning what happens if this problem goes unresolved, or what opportunities are missed if we don't jump on top of this thing that we've identified as maybe a good opportunity to intervene or to act. And then identifying and clearly saying, here's what we should do. Here's the solution. And then that's separate from a specific recommendation, which is a concrete, these are the steps that I recommend someone specific should take to achieve that solution. And again, because we're going real fast, there is an example paper. You can find it on the JSPG website. It's an example paper because I wrote it. So I feel very capable of saying like, look, go look at my thing. It's fine. Me and my co-author did a bit on developing a civic science undergraduate reinvigoration to make STEM education better prepare undergraduates for the lives they go and lead. You are going to, oh, these arrows are off. Well, imagine. The important thing here is like, we'll kind of provide this information, but each of these pieces you can break down into very succinct things. So in our paper, me and my co-author, we said the context is most STEM graduates actually have careers not in STEM fields. They do lots of other things. So they become STEM trained civic participants doing life as they know it, but they have a STEM background. So how can we make sure that STEM education prepares them for that role? Because right now, the problem, STEM education doesn't prepare them for engaging with things outside of a career context. So whether that be in like their personal lives, in their civic lives, all these things, they're not really necessarily part of that. And then ditto for policy significance, proposed solution, and like specific recommendations. We said that we should try to advance the public good by preparing STEM graduates for these things. And to do that through civic science education, which was specifically through developing certain degree programs in university settings, which is a really crash course way of saying this is kind of the breakdown that you want to be able to have. It doesn't take super long. It doesn't have to be super in depth, but having these concrete pieces is what's necessary to kind of have an effective policy piece. So I think I want to stop because I wanted to just like rant as fast as I could and open the floor for any questions or anything else before we go into breakout rooms, because yes, that's there. So I'll stop and I'll say thanks for listening to me kind of go wild for a little bit, but questions before we go into breakout rooms. And I can't see hands right now. Hold on. Great. Okay. Yeah. Francesca.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. It's been great so far. A question I had, I was part of the NSPN boot camp last year, and I kept struggling with the same thing. So I thought I would pose the question. How specific and how broad do our policy solutions need to be? I always felt like mine were too broad, and I would see others who had very specific solutions depending on their audience. And I was curious on your take on that.
Yeah, it is probably the single hardest thing to determine that. What's the right scale for your audience or your problem and what you're proposing? What I've found to be the most successful kind of approach, if the scale of what you're trying to solve feels too broad, identifying who are the specific actors that if you could, grab someone by the lapels and force them to read the paper you're writing, who's the person or the people that you want to do something, and starting with those folks. So maybe it's a particular senator who sits on a subcommittee that you think needs to introduce a bill or to vote a certain way or something, or it could be a municipality who looks over like water resource management, or it could be a university, a college at a university or something like that, where they need to like change how they do education, or a community organization that needs to revamp how they actually like involve their members in something. So identifying the audience is, I think, the first step. But for sense of like scale, specific and broad, the more specific you can be, I think the more powerful your recommendations are, because it demonstrates that you're not just someone on the sidelines who's able to identify problems, however accurately, and then saying, well, someone should do something about this problem, and here's maybe a direction to go. Being more specific shows that you are aware of kind of the roadblocks of why the problems haven't been solved already. Many of the policy problems I think that we identify are not the result of nobody knows what's going on, or no one has any interest in solving them, or people are just incompetent. Sometimes it's a combination of those things, but oftentimes it's because the problems are sticky. Like there's hard things about them, and there's maybe not the right information or maybe the clarity of what direction to go with the solutions that already exist. And so by being more specific rather than more general, I think being able to be as concrete as, oh, I think that this particular bill that I know is going to come up in the next congressional session, I would urge members to vote this way for these reasons, because here's the outcomes that will come from that. Or as specific as this policy that this university has should be amended to include this group as well as the groups it already does. That level of specificity, I think, is the what you should aim for. And if you're broader than that, you can still have success and find ways to present your recommendations, but they need to be really grounded in the fact that, yeah, they're broad. And so here are like first steps for achieving this, but not trying to present them as fully grown or fully complete solutions. Which I feel like maybe that answers part of the spirit of your question, but also that I may not have answered it entirely.
No, it did. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I appreciate that.
Other questions before? I know I want to be mindful of time, Adriana.
Yeah, maybe one more if anyone has any. If not, we can maybe introduce the moderators. And I'll share the Google Doc for the breakout rooms right now while we're doing that.
Great. Okay. Well then, well, thanks everybody for coming to this, and I love getting to talk into my laptop in the Zoom room for things that are really interesting for me. So
there is a question in the chat.
Oh, there is.
You can see it.
Let me pull it up. I'm just over here not paying attention. It's from Cynthia, yeah?
Yeah.
Great. It's called Papers Made. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. If it's so the unanticipated risks and consequences is absolutely fair game, I think, for something to write about. I'm realizing now my previous response may have made it sound like if you don't already know how to solve the problem, as if you were like supreme ruler of the world to make everything work exactly right, then don't bother writing. That's not the case. Even just identifying like incremental things of something that's already going on, like about mitigation or trying to deal with these unanticipated risks or consequences, you absolutely can and should write about that. I think this call for papers, there's a lot of areas where you might say, well, we've done X, we've done this thing, and we've trying to solve a problem, and turns out there's some other things that came with it we didn't fully prepare for. We need to address that. That I think is a really actually clever way to get at, like, I know for me when I wrote things, I didn't always have all the answers, but finding just pieces where you can say like, well, here's one thing that would help to solving some of these issues a little bit. So absolutely, I think that's a great kind of topic to write about. And I see also from Vivian now, sub-state level interventions. Oh, definitely not too narrow. Sometimes even sub-state level stuff is more powerful in some ways because it's so contextualized, and it like kind of presents a case study in a very narrow, concrete, and specific way that may be applicable as elsewhere. But yeah, if you're in Texas and write about health policy there, I am confident that whatever you're looking at is going to have relevance to places not just in the US, but probably broadly. Cool. All right. Well then, I think I'll say a little bit about our moderators who are going to help us with these breakout sessions. Yeah, so some of these folks they're all great, but some of these are Civic Science Fellow alums, and others are I can kind of see people I'll try to do this in a way that like is in the order I see on my Zoom. So we have Nikki Krause, who's a Civic Science Fellow, who is just defended her dissertation, and so congratulations for that. But you are at University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Yes.
Right? Yes, fantastic. Okay, so Nikki is going to be one of our moderators as well as working through my Zoom here. Andrew George, who is also a Civic Science Fellow alum, who is now your project manager at, let me see if I remember this right, Life Science Manufacturing, the Ambassador Program. Is that right?
Yeah, the organization's the North Carolina Biotechnology Center.
Okay. North Carolina Biotechnology Center. Fantastic. So yeah, Andrew is also a Civic Science Fellow alum. And did Eunice, did you join? Eunice Mercado Lara? Yes, she's here. Wonderful. Eunice is also a Civic Science Fellow with the Open Research Fund, ORFG. Yeah, okay. And is doing some really great work. Really glad to have you here with us. So some Civic Science Fellow alums, and then also wonderfully helping us out here. I made some notes so I get this right. Heidi Yay. Do I have it right that you also just defended your dissertation?
Yes, in oceanography.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations for that. You're with the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Yeah, Pineland Preservation Alliance. So is joining us today, as well as Nicole Pozo, who is a clinical research coordinator at the Heat Lab at Emory University. I have that, making sure I have this right. Okay, fantastic. And you do work with the human experience with digital health technologies.
That's great.
And then Adam Cooper is here, also fantastic. Adam is a PhD candidate at UCSD in atmospheric chemistry. And you do work with micropollutants in ocean air transport. Is that right?
Yep.
Fantastic. So this is the group kind of folks who are going to help moderate and give us some things. I want to give a little background for the folks here. They're all really, really wonderful and engaged science policy folks. So with that, I think I'm done. I need to shut up and let the next thing happen with breakout rooms.
Yeah, so we're ready to go. We'll take about maybe 20 minutes at this point, and then we'll come back and recap the last few minutes. We'll ask one person from each room to just recap very quickly something that you learned. And of course, these Google Docs will be there for you to continue working, but hopefully this will give you a bit of a primer of what it's like to be working on this in a group. So, okay, let's see, can open the rooms.
We were just solving it. 30 more seconds and I'm pretty sure we would have nailed it.
You solved the problem? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We just want to take a couple of minutes to recap and have each room share something that they learned. And it was very quick, but again, primer for this, and hopefully we'll get you to work on this more. So just going in order, if we're gonna have Nikki, just one thing you want to share that you all discussed or learned from your room.
Well, one thing we talked about was in the section about incentives and rewards, just sometimes in addition to brainstorming what some of the incentives might be that you need to get people aligned and kind of build capacity for the proposal, that it may be useful to identify incentives that are already pushing in the other direction too, and kind of the possibility that, you know, it won't be enough to just brainstorm these new incentives, but also to kind of overcome movement in the other direction. So that's just one thing. We had a couple of questions come up too, and I don't know if I'm just going to state them. One was whether there is any infrastructure for, as outlines are being put together for these papers, for some commentary on them or feedback on them to be received from someone. So that's a question for the organizers here. The second one was about the, there was an optional prompt about implementation, and the question kind of broadly is, to what extent does that need to really figure in the paper to make the paper effective? Can it be something that's touched on? It's often kind of difficult to pinpoint maybe what the implementation would be, but how much hope for that is there in the papers?
Yeah, I can answer the first one. So we can facilitate that if you'd like feedback. I'll send an email out after with the documents and the recording. If you'd like to get feedback on the outline, let us know. We can help with that. I think Christian, maybe you can answer the second part.
Yeah, for the second, I think implementation is always great, but I would say it's optional, just like that kind of prompt was optional. To think through. So don't feel like you can't if you don't have that part.
Thanks. Okay, so room 2, Andrew and Adam.
All right, I apparently didn't understand the assignment because we didn't do a lot of talking. I had them write out their own personal ones because I have too much of a tendency in these particular workshops to just like talk about other people's ideas. Then I leave and I don't have anything written for my own idea. So we spent most of our time having them work on their specific topics. So anybody from our group want to share a bit about what you talked about or what you wrote about? That'd be great. Although Francesca was going to be the person I called on and she ducked out. Let's see. Cynthia, I know you were in my group.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sure. So, similar to maybe a question that I posed earlier, something that I started writing, thank you for the time for allowing me to write and think about it, was the implementation of some policies, but that maybe didn't anticipate other problems that arise. So I started to explore how these laws that were implemented could have been improved upon if they were implemented with like an educational campaign, or maybe having folks have a little, this is related to environmental justice and later just for more context. And just seeing how these policies and laws were implemented like as standalone. So right now I was also doing research in the background. But yeah, that's kind of what I was exploring, how to improve these policies that have already been implemented.
That sounds fantastic. And I want to hop in and say, I know we're at kind of time. So if you have to hop off, like, please go and be free. But if not, I'm going to be sticking on I want to hear from the other groups as well. So thanks for everybody who has to go.
Yeah, thank you. Eunice, if you're still here.
I'll make it super quick because I appreciate the ones that are saying a few seconds longer to make enough justice to the work they did. Basically, we identified that it's an information asymmetry problem, that the incentives are not there either for society, for other communities, nor the government agencies, nor the advocates themselves. So we think that from the experience that Jane shared with us, creating partnerships with either the communities and advocates and empowering them to have access to scientific pieces of information so they can do their work better and they can put that information on the hands of the ones making the decision will be super helpful. Also, Prashak, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name in the worst possible way. But the centralization of that information, not only thinking that there's one land outlet where you have to put that information and these advocates or partnerships will find it, just make it available elsewhere in different shapes and forms can definitely help to do this work. And one more thing, lobbyists, we forgot about thinking people who are actually doing lobby for work. We should also think about how to put them in this conversation in a pragmatic way. That's it.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. Moving on to Heidi and Nicole. Do you all have some takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, we had a pretty good group discussion about the different stakeholders involved, not only on the local level, but then also some regional and national stakeholders that are respective to folks' individual projects. I think everyone from our group has left, but Vivian, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have anything you want to share out, we'd love to hear from you.
I just want to say it was a really great discussion. It's helped us start thinking about what kind of policy piece we want to write. Because we have a health and science education initiative that we want to talk about that's happening at the local level. And so we're really excited to be part of this. So thank you all so much.
That's great. Thank you all. Just want to wrap up and share again the events that are coming up. Stay tuned for more, but August 8th, we have our first webinar. And September 5th, you can register for both now if you'd like. We'll have some high-level discussions on civic science, to give you some more ideas about what you can write on. And thanks again to everyone who joined today. Thanks to the moderators. Thank you, Christian. I'll let you wrap up if you want to say anything else.
I'll just say thanks everybody for coming. I'm really excited to see what papers get submitted as special issue. This is really kind of my wheelhouse, so I'm really looking forward to it. And for those of you who stayed on, just to plug, if you want to ask more questions or follow up or whatever, I don't have a thing to drop in the chat, but Google me, reach out. You can find my email at Tufts. Like, I'm happy to chat more if that's something that'd be helpful. So thanks for everybody. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you all.